What horrific things did Sinclair do to his test subjects, and why did they remain conscious during their transformation? The answers to these and other fascinating questions about the Reanimen in this video. Yes, Sinclair believes in progress, but not the kind that will improve your life. Rather, the kind that will partially replace you with something else, something you definitely won't like. Because to him, you're just nature's failed creation. Your muscles are weak, your body is susceptible to disease, and your brain is cluttered with unnecessary emotions. But he firmly believes that he can fix all of this.
Mr. Sinclair, once again it seems you have an opinion to share.
I have the truth to share.
Sinclair's full debut occurred in issue 20 of the comic. We see him at a biology lecture at the university that Mark and his friends enrolled in. Sinclair demonstratively arrives late, expressing his disrespect to the professor. For him, it's humiliating to attend a subject he knows better than anyone, a subject he could teach himself. But he's going to graduate school, and the course has to be passed one way or another, so he has to attend. We also learn that Sinclair attends university on a financial grant specifically for young geniuses like him. He's been here for at least 4 years, from which we can assume he's about 20 years old. Yes, Sinclair is very young. Soon after class, an unidentified monster begins rampaging on university grounds, but it definitely represents what could be described as a cyborg, a creature combining both artificial and organic components. And this is already the second attack by such a monster on university territory. We were shown a similar one in issue 6, when Mark and his friends came here on a tour. Invincible quickly deals with the creature, but the cyborg provokes its own fall from a height, smashing into the ground. This surprises Mark. Do these creatures have no survival instinct? After all, that first one also killed itself in the end. Of course it doesn't, because as we'll soon learn, they're assembled from dead flesh. We also learn that these Reanimen escaped from Sinclair's temporary laboratory of their own accord. They instinctively sought their death because they were already dead. And in connection with this, Sinclair makes a terrible decision. With a solid immersion into the atmosphere of uncomfortable body horror, he decides to experiment on living people. Yes, Sinclair's story and his test subjects convey one of the most nightmarish human fears, something perhaps more terrifying than death itself. In your complete helplessness, finding yourself in the hands of a mad scientist who cuts, reassembles, and reconstructs your body. He's trying to make something greater from your body, something horrible. And the scariest part is that he succeeds. Your primal fear and remnants of willpower will desperately try to maintain control. But will you succeed? Will the remnants of your humanity prevail?
I'm not turning people into anything. I'm fixing humanity's weaknesses.
Next time we're shown the scientist in a new laboratory, also on university grounds. The location of the latter was nearly revealed by a Reaniman jumping to the surface. Sinclair is at work and shares his story with someone still off camera. Since childhood, he dreamed of finding a way to revive dead tissue. He wanted to bring his loved ones back to life, and he also wanted a Nobel Prize. But in his search for creating life, he ultimately succeeded in creating death. And over time, he became obsessed with constructing absolute killing machines, devoid of typical human weaknesses. He spent all his time studying at university perfecting his technologies. From his words, we can also understand that the Reanimen design is dictated not only by technological needs, but also by his personal taste preferences in the design of death. I'll put it this way, he's not just an engineer, he's a sculptor with surgical instruments in his hands. And soon we learn exactly who Sinclair was addressing in his monologue. The first living test subject in his body horror clutches turns out to be Mark's college friend Rick Sheridan, the first living subject to be transformed into a Reaniman. And let's pay attention to what Sinclair has already done to Rick's body. He's already replaced his left arm with a roboticized prosthetic. This is a regular visual feature of almost all early Reanimen. Notice that Sinclair replaced the arm, along with the complexly structured shoulder joint. The shoulder joint connects the humerus with the scapula and clavicle. This means Sinclair also had to remove part of the subject's scapula and clavicle. After all, the new hinge connection looks quite bulky for human anatomy. We also see that Sinclair performed surgery on Rick's knee joints. Of course, the essence of the procedure was to strengthen them. We also see tubes connected to the subject's body, supplying some liquid to his organism. Most likely, the task of these substances is adapting flesh to iron. In simple terms, the mad scientist must avoid the organism rejecting all foreign elements. For this purpose, he adapts poor Rick's biochemistry. We also see some extensive manipulations over the abdominal organs. I have a theory about what this might be for. We'll be convinced more than once that the set of basic human internal organs in Reanimen is generally preserved, and there's no significant protection for these organs. But I'll note that in the comic, this area looks much more protected. Their torsos aren't equipped with solid armor because it could negatively affect their mobility. Therefore, Sinclair restructures the natural biological functions of the test subjects' internal organs. First, this will make them less vulnerable in case of critical torso injuries. Second, he adapts the organ's work for the needs of not just a biological, but a technobiological system. No, what have you done to Rick? Also, if we turn to the official Invincible Universe handbook, at minimum we learn that subsequently Rick's entire skeleton will be replaced with a durable metal analog, or the previous skeleton will be reinforced with appropriate modifications. In this case, Sinclair decided to start with the knees. By the way, future comic events will show us Sinclair already working for Cecil, precisely in the process of skeleton reinforcement. If anything, this isn't a spoiler. This is within the events of Season 3. Here you can see that he's gradually replacing a segment of organic skeleton with metal. Also, the main muscle groups of the Reanimen are replaced with synthetic ones. In this case, we're talking about body parts not subjected to prosthetics as such. And regarding organs, perhaps for the functioning of a cybernetic organism, Sinclair not only restructures previous organs, but also adds some artificial ones, but this is uncertain. And one more interesting point from the handbook. Despite the fact that Sinclair adapts the compatibility of flesh and metal, nevertheless over time, a Reaniman may need replacement of organic parts. That is, the rejection process is slowed down, not eliminated. More than a week will pass from Rick's disappearance, and we're shown the mad genius at his work again. Sinclair has taken to kidnapping homeless people living in the university area, replenishing his Reanimen army with them. In total, he kidnapped about a dozen people, including Rick. We see him performing manipulations on the brain of another unfortunate test subject, possibly on the frontal area responsible for self-awareness, moral judgments, and initiative, leaving untouched the areas responsible for motor commands. We also see that he implanted a visor in the homeless man's head, the technical vision organ of Reanimen. Interestingly, this is more of an additional vision organ, as he doesn't remove the subject's previous eyes, but everything here is individual. He's an artist, he sees it differently, and another monologue by the scientist reveals yet another aspect of the subject's horrible fate. Sinclair apologizes to the homeless man for not using anesthesia, as he simply doesn't have money for it, and he cuts the victim's vocal cords not only so their screams won't give away their location, but also so their screams won't traumatize their own ears. He says so himself. Of course, experiencing all this pain, such traumatic shock, victims aren't always able to remain conscious. For example, Rick will remember through his nightmares how Sinclair cut his flesh while he was alive, reaching for the heart he sought to modify. And during the attachment of the new arm, Rick had already lost consciousness from such an amount of pain experienced, temporarily of course. Soon Rick came to, and the hell continued. Of course, conducting such manipulations on the brain, Sinclair is capable of shutting down the subject's nervous systems without anesthesia, but soon we'll learn why he didn't do this. And our old acquaintance Rick Sheridan brings him a new test subject, already in the form of an established Reaniman. Rick is crying, demonstrating to us the remnants of self-awareness, which in general doesn't particularly surprise Sinclair. Apparently, he's confident that these residual fragments of previous brain activity won't be able to suppress his control. But he's wrong. There's no point appealing to his feelings. I personally removed them. And yes, you probably noticed that Rick's skin color is pale, although he is a living test subject like many others. Perhaps these are some drawing conventions, as for example in the sewers and in Sinclair's laboratory, everyone's skin will be drawn pale, including Mark, too. But if that's not the case here, then we can assume that this is the result of Sinclair's interference in the biochemistry of gas exchange in the organism. That is, Reanimen tissues no longer require as much oxygen as before. If Sinclair sought to eliminate the weaknesses of the human body, then this is quite logical. After some time, Mark decides to use the kidnapper of homeless people as bait. And for this, William had to pretend to be homeless. An hour later, a Reaniman appears and drags William into Sinclair's hands. Mark is detained by a party of Reanimen, and the scientist tells William that he's glad he's not drunk and not insane, meaning he'll scream a lot, which will definitely give Sinclair pleasure. But let's make a correction. Not specifically screaming, but wheezing and groaning with cut vocal cords. Yes, Sinclair has also turned into a sadist who gets pleasure from his victims' suffering. And sometimes in rare cases, he can still use anesthesia, but only so the victim doesn't jerk around unnecessarily, so he doesn't cut something he shouldn't. But for a college student like Sinclair, this is expensive. And one way or another, he strives to use more budget means. For example, as now injecting William with a drug that will immobilize him, paralyze him, but won't relieve the pain. But Mark appears in time and saves his friend from having his vocal cords cut. The Reanimen cause Invincible substantial problems, and William manages to reach the remnants of Rick's self-awareness. Rick takes Mark's side, and Mark breaks Sinclair's jaw. Cecil appears with his team, who promises Mark to do everything possible to return Rick to human form. Yes, Rick will never be the same. His organs, natural biological functions which were redesigned for a cybernetic organism, will no longer be able to support life as before. That's why Cecil's team reconstructs Rick's torso even more, because Sinclair destroyed the human in him at a physiological level. But Rick's vocal cords will heal, and his arm will be replaced with an analog indistinguishable from a human one. And regarding the restoration of Rick's brain function, we already know two important things. First, in previous videos, we've talked more than once about real cases known to medicine, when the brain was able to redistribute the functions of lost areas to surviving ones, even in seemingly incredible situations. And second, we also know that Cecil's team possesses advanced developments in terms of restoring brain functionality. And yes, we remember that later, interested in Sinclair's work, Cecil offered him a job with the United States government, which Mark won't like very much. Here, between the comic and the series, there's one important artistic difference. In the comic, Sinclair mentions that there was someone who helped him cover up traces of his previous laboratory's locations and helped liquidate the remains of previous Reanimen. And this someone was Cecil, who had long been observing Sinclair's developments. That is, Cecil's grey zone in his comic image already flows into the dark zone. You're working with Sinclair even better, because one way or another he knew what Sinclair was doing all this time, knew what he was doing to people. If not fully, then fragmentarily for sure. And now Mark and Cecil's conflict can be viewed from a different angle, can't it? But that's beside the point. And not straying far from the topic of differences between the comic and animation, let's look at these same events again, but from the show's perspective. There are certain dramatic and body horror enhancements in the series. For the most part, this concerns Sinclair's first victim in the series that we were shown, a drunk student named Doug. Doug first thought it was some kind of prank, and this guy who dressed up like a mad scientist from art house body horror is talking about some miracle rebirth, and that Doug is incredibly lucky. Right there we're shown prototypes where we see a recognizable frequent feature of Reanimen, cut tissues in the jaw area, exposing teeth. This is how the mad genius visually embodies his interpretation of death, but not in all cases. And the design of what Doug will become will be different, Sinclair says. Doug sees with horror that his right arm no longer looks like what he usually saw. This madman decided to replace the student's left forearm and hand in a crude, in quotation marks, way. He partially left the tissues around the prosthetic forearm intact. From the Reaniman's functionality standpoint, this plays no role, but in Doug's perception, this only intensifies his horror, as he sees not just technology, but a meaty symbiosis of technology and flesh, something more frightening and unknown. This is what Sinclair was aiming for, playing with his victim. Of course, Sinclair deprives the captive of the ability to speak and scream loudly, but here he doesn't just cut the vocal cords, he cuts them out along with the surrounding flesh. An aggressive Reaniman in the form of unfortunate reconstructed Doug won't keep anyone waiting. He'll go rampaging on the same university territory, also escaping from the laboratory of his own accord due to uncertainty in self-identification, uncontrolled aggression, and an enormous amount of pain tearing him apart from within. Blood comes from Doug Reaniman's mouth. This tells us that the reconstruction of his organs happened very recently, and the inflamed flesh at the contact points of organics and metal tells us that Doug's biological parts are still rejecting these insane modifications. The cyborg is insanely strong, especially compared to a Viltrumite, even a young one. This is what primarily parasitizes Cecil. Sinclair is capable of creating such weapons in the sewers without even having an acceptable budget. The most dramatic moment is when Mark tears the helmet from Doug's face, and he sees his reflection and realizes what that madman, whom he now remembers only fragmentarily, turned him into. Sinclair removed his nose to place the helmet on his head. By the way, he doesn't do this in all cases. The suppressed survival instinct will help Doug, suffering from pain and horror, make a difficult decision to independently put an end to his torment, and observing this, Sinclair will set his sights on Rick. This story will continue basically the same way. Well, the series doesn't show us the body horror transformation aspects of Rick. Sinclair was already about to start cutting William. Yes, he prefers to start with the arms, but Rick's self-awareness, even with the frontal lobe removed, will prevail, and he'll tear the control module from his head. Music. Take him away from here. Yes, later Cecil employs Sinclair in his department, and if anything, Sinclair won't work as a prisoner. The case against Sinclair was covered up. He has no criminal record and won't have one. He works for an excellent salary. He'll say so himself, and according to a schedule agreed upon with his employer. When he said that evening movies were cancelled due to workload, it wasn't irony. He really was going to the movies that evening. With the resources of the Global Defense Agency, Sinclair will constantly refine his technology. He'll put it into production, applying it piece by piece even to Viltrumites. Viltrumites are genetically identical to humans, with the difference that reconstructing their tissues requires significantly more time. Their tissues are incredibly strong and dense, but such Reanimen in working condition can be practically eternal. After all, concepts like decomposition and decay are practically inapplicable to Viltrumite biology, even if brain death is established. Additionally, reinforcement of the musculoskeletal system isn't required for Viltrumite Reanimen. The main mass of created Reanimen will number not only in the hundreds, but in the thousands. They'll be made from dead American soldiers who supposedly agreed to this while still alive. But knowing Cecil, I think the last point isn't mandatory. The Reanimen will show their usefulness already in the battle against Omniman. They've become smarter, more agile, more efficient. They're 100% controllable and devoid of any interfering residual fragments of self-awareness. And by the way, their exposed skull is no longer just a visual attribute of Sinclair's deranged brain, it's now a functional weapon. Their teeth were replaced with artificial implants, and now they can bite quite viciously. Well, Sinclair is thrilled that Omniman will still tear them to pieces, but after all, their task was distraction. By the way, there were no such events in the comic. This is a liberty of the animation plot, and at this point I'll probably finish my story, as further narration will essentially only be a set of spoilers, no longer having a substantive relation to this video's topic. But one way or another, Sinclair's story is not a story of warped progress. It's a story that there are people who should never under any circumstances be allowed into a morgue. Give your opinion in the comments. And special thanks to my fellow YouTuber Hasselhoff. Link to his channel is in description, go check his amazing content. If you liked this video, subscribe to my channel, leave a like, comment, don't forget to share this video with friends.